Adolf Hitler. Concrete dust shakes from the bunker ceiling. Artillery strikes move closer through central Berlin. Inside the underground corridor, officers walk quickly and avoid each other's eyes. Control is gone. The war has reached the door. On the 30th of April 1945, Adolf Hitler remained inside the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin. He was 56 years old. For 12 years he had ruled Nazi Germany as absolute dictator. His armies once controlled most of Europe. Now Soviet forces surrounded the capital from every direction. Records show the Red Army had already reached nearby government districts. Inside the bunker, witnesses describe exhaustion and silence. Maps covered the tables, but units marked on them no longer existed. Communications lines were collapsing. Joseph Goebbels remained nearby, still declaring loyalty. Outside, Soviet artillery closed the distance hour by hour. Then recognition came. Hitler ordered final preparations. Staff members Otto Gunsch and Heinz Linge received instructions about the body. Authorities later determined fuel had already been moved to the garden above the bunker. Shortly after 3:30 p.m., Hitler entered a private room with Eva Braun, whom he had married the previous day. A sharp crack sounded. Linge opened the door minutes later. The room smelled strongly of chemicals. Hitler sat slumped on a sofa. Eva Braun lay beside him. Silence followed. It was over in seconds. Witnesses later recalled that Hitler had used a pistol while also biting a cyanide capsule. Accounts vary on which method caused death first. What is documented is this: both were dead when staff entered. Gunsch ordered the bodies carried upstairs. Soviet artillery still struck the area. In the Reich Chancellery garden, aides placed the bodies in a shell crater. Fuel was poured over them. The fire was lit. Official Soviet reports later confirmed charred remains were recovered days later by SMERSH. Counterintelligence units. Authorities transported fragments for identification procedures. Dental records were compared with files held by Hitler's dentist. One guard reportedly refused to look closely. Berlin civilians nearby continued hiding in cellars as the regime collapsed above them. Within hours, Joseph Goebbels would also die in the same bunker complex. Hitler had ordered millions into war. Now his own body was burned in secrecy. Nazi rule ended underground. The bunker door closed behind the last witnesses. It never opened again. Nicolae Ceaușescu. The helicopter lifts off from the roof. Soldiers shout below. The crowd surges through the square, pushing against barricades and cameras. Inside the aircraft, Nicolae Ceaușescu grips the seat as the pilot searches for a safe landing. Authority is slipping. On the 22nd of December 1989, Ceaușescu fled Bucharest during the Romanian Revolution. He was 71 years old. For nearly 24 years he ruled Romania as a rigid communist dictator. His government controlled the press, the police, and the feared secret service known as the Securitate. Records show nationwide protests had erupted after violent crackdowns in the city of Timișoara. By midday, the capital was turning. Crowds stormed the Central Committee building. Television broadcasts showed confusion spreading through the regime. Army units began switching sides. Defense Minister Vasil Malia had died earlier that morning under disputed circumstances. Recognition came quickly. Ceaușescu's helicopter landed near Tichu after airspace restrictions were imposed. Local authorities stopped the vehicle he later used to continue the escape. Witnesses later recalled that soldiers hesitated before detaining him and his wife, Elena Ceaușescu. They were transported under guard. Authorities transferred the couple to a military unit in Targovik. Official reports confirmed they were held inside a small garrison building, while fighting continued across the country. 3 days later, a military tribunal assembled inside the base. The charges were read quickly. The verdict came faster. Rifles lifted toward the wall. Shots rang out in the courtyard. Both bodies dropped immediately. Dust lifted from the concrete wall. Soldiers stood still for several seconds. It was over in seconds. Official reports confirm Nicolae and Elena Ceaușescu were executed on the 25th of December 1989 at the Targovik military base. A camera crew recorded portions of the trial and aftermath. Authorities later transported the bodies to Bucharest for burial procedures. Accounts vary on how organized the tribunal actually was. One soldier reportedly crossed himself afterward. State television soon broadcast images confirming the deaths. The announcement spread quickly through Romanian cities still under tension. Many citizens gathered around televisions waiting for confirmation the dictatorship had ended. Ceaușescu had ruled through secret police and public fear. Now his final judgment happened inside a military yard. The dictatorship ended that afternoon. The rifles lowered. The courtyard fell silent. Benito Mussolini. The convoy slows near a small village checkpoint. German trucks idle along the road. Armed partisans step forward and begin inspecting the vehicles one by one. Inside a crowded transport, Benito Mussolini sits silent beneath a German coat. He is recognized. On the 27th of April 1945, Mussolini was stopped near the village of Dongo on Lake Como in northern Italy. He was 61 years old. For more than 2 decades, he ruled Italy as fascist dictator. His regime built a police state, suppressed opposition, and aligned closely with Nazi Germany. Records show Allied forces were advancing rapidly across northern Italy, while resistance groups seized control of towns. Collapse was already underway. Mussolini attempted to escape toward Switzerland within a German convoy retreating north. Partisan fighters from the 52nd Garibaldi Brigade controlled the road near Dongo. Among them was partisan commander Urbano Lazzaro, who later described the moment of discovery. Recognition spread quickly. Witnesses later recalled that Lazzaro ordered the disguised passenger out of the truck. Mussolini stepped down slowly, surrounded by armed fighters. Authorities determined the convoy was immediately halted and the prisoner separated. He was taken into custody. Official reports confirm Mussolini and his companion, Clara Petacci, were transported overnight to the nearby village of Giuliano di Mezzegra. Local partisan leaders debated what to do with the captured dictator while Allied forces approached. Then the decision came. On the morning of the 28th of April, a partisan officer arrived. Records identify him as Walter Adisio, operating under the name Colonel Valerio. Accounts vary about the exact orders he carried. The prisoners were placed against a wall. Rifle shots broke the quiet courtyard. Mussolini collapsed immediately beside Petacci. Dust drifted across the stone ground. No one spoke for several seconds. It was over in seconds. Authorities later transported the bodies by truck to Milan. The vehicle arrived at Piazza Loreto, a public square already associated with earlier executions during the occupation. The crowd gathered quickly. Official reports confirm the bodies were hung upside down from a metal girder at a petrol station. Photographs circulated worldwide as proof the fascist leader was dead. One partisan later admitted he felt relief. Mussolini once ordered opponents publicly executed. Now his own body was displayed in the street. Italian fascist rule ended in collapse. The body swung above Piazza Loreto. The dictatorship ended there. Joseph Stalin. A heavy body collapses beside the dining table. Glass lies shattered across the floor. Guards outside the door hear nothing at first. Only the ticking wall clock and silence inside the room. No one enters. On the 1st of March 1953, Joseph Stalin was found incapacitated inside his private residence at the Kuntsevo dacha outside Moscow. He was 74 years old. For nearly 3 decades, he ruled the Soviet Union through centralized power and security purges. His authority shaped the communist state, the Red Army, and the vast intelligence apparatus. Records show millions had been imprisoned or executed during earlier campaigns directed from Moscow. Fear still controlled the room. That night, Stalin had hosted senior officials including Lavrentiy Beria, Georgy Malenkov, Nikita Khrushchev, and Nikolai Bulganin. Witnesses later recalled the meeting ended late, and the guards were instructed not to disturb the leader afterward. Morning passed. Stalin did not emerge from his room. Guards hesitated to enter without orders. Authorities later determined that hours passed while the leader lay on the floor unable to move or speak. By evening, officers finally opened the door. They found him collapsed beside a table. Official reports describe labored breathing and partial paralysis. Medical staff were summoned to the residence while senior officials returned quickly to the dacha. Recognition spread quietly. Doctors confirmed Stalin had suffered a massive stroke. Accounts vary on exactly when the attack occurred or why help was delayed so long. What is documented is this: treatment began many hours after the collapse. The room stayed guarded. Over the next several days, Stalin drifted between consciousness and silence. Records show the Soviet leadership gathered repeatedly nearby, waiting for the outcome while state broadcasts remained cautious. Then the moment came. Breathing slowed inside the bedroom chamber. Doctors watched closely beside the bed. Curtains were drawn against the winter light. No one spoke for several seconds. The pulse stopped. He was 74 years old. Official reports confirmed Joseph Stalin died on the 5th of March 1953 at the Kuntsevo dacha. Authorities immediately organized state funeral logistics in Moscow. including transport of the body to the House of Unions. One attendant later admitted he felt relief. Stalin once ordered mass arrests and executions. Now his own body lay under guard. The Soviet leader died in that room. The doors closed behind the doctors. The silence remained. Mao Zedong. Medical equipment hums beside the bed. Doctors move quietly through the guarded room. The patient struggles to breathe while aides wait outside the door, speaking in low voices. Control is fading. On the 9th of September 1976, Mao Zedong died in Beijing at the Zhongnan High Leadership Compound. He was 82 years old. For nearly 3 decades, he ruled the People's Republic of China as its dominant revolutionary leader. His authority shaped the Communist Party, the army, and national policy. Records show his campaigns, including the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution, had transformed the country through radical political control. Power still surrounded the room. In his final months, Mao suffered severe heart and lung problems. Witnesses later recalled that teams of doctors monitored him constantly inside his private residence near the Forbidden City. Among the senior officials nearby were Premier Hua Guofeng and longtime aide Wang Dongxing. The leadership watched carefully. China had already entered a period of uncertainty. Zhou Enlai had died earlier in 1976. Factional struggles inside the Communist Party were intensifying. Recognition came slowly. Official reports confirmed Mao's health declined sharply during the summer. Authorities restricted information while the leadership debated how to manage succession and public reaction. Doctors remained stationed beside the bed. Accounts vary on how conscious Mao remained during his final days. What is documented is this: medical teams attempted repeated emergency treatments inside the compound. Then the final collapse came. Monitors signaled a sudden change in rhythm. Doctors moved closer to the bed. The room remained dim under overhead lights. Several officials stood silently nearby. The heartbeat stopped. He was 82 years old. Official reports confirm Mao Zedong died shortly after midnight in Zhongnanhai. Authorities immediately initiated national funeral procedures and transferred the body under guard to the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. Large crowds soon gathered. Records show millions of Chinese citizens later passed by the casket. During public mourning ceremonies, state media broadcast carefully controlled announcements across the country. One doctor reportedly lowered his eyes. Mao had ruled through mass campaigns and political purges. Now his body lay preserved behind glass. The leader died in Zhongnanhai. The succession struggle began immediately. The system moved forward without him. Augusto Pinochet. Monitors beep rapidly in a hospital intensive care unit. Doctors move around the bed while security officers wait outside the door. The patient breathes with difficulty, surrounded by machines and quiet orders. Power no longer protects him. On the 10th of December 2006, Augusto Pinochet died at the military hospital in Santiago, Chile. He was 91 years old. For 17 years he ruled Chile after leading a military coup in 1973. His regime dissolved Congress, censored the press, and imprisoned thousands of political opponents. Records show security forces under his command detained, tortured, or killed thousands during the dictatorship. The investigations had already begun. After leaving office in 1990, Pinochet remained commander of the Chilean army and later became a senator for life. But legal pressure increased. Spanish Judge Baltasar Garzon issued an international arrest warrant in 1998 accusing him of human rights crimes. Then came exposure. British authorities detained Pinochet in London during a medical visit. Witnesses later recalled the arrest surprised his entourage and triggered international legal battles. Authorities determined he remained under house arrest in Britain for more than a year before being allowed to return to Chile. Back home, the cases multiplied. Chilean judges reopened investigations involving disappearances and secret detention centers. Records show Judge Juan Guzman Tapia brought multiple indictments related to Operation Condor and political killings. The pressure remained constant. Accounts vary on whether Pinochet fully understood the legal proceedings during his final years. What is documented is this: he faced numerous charges while repeatedly appealing on health grounds. Then the final crisis arrived. Medical alarms sounded inside the hospital room. Doctors leaned over the bed quickly. White lights reflected from steel equipment. Nurses stopped speaking. The pulse faded. He was 91 years old. Official reports confirm Pinochet died after complications from a heart attack and pulmonary edema. Authorities transported the body under military guard for funeral arrangements in Santiago. The government denied a state funeral. Supporters gathered outside the hospital gates waving Chilean flags. At the same time, critics celebrated publicly in several neighborhoods of the capital. One former detainee reportedly said nothing. Pinochet once ruled with emergency decrees and secret prisons. Now he died facing criminal accusations. The trials never reached a verdict. The courtroom files closed with his death. The proceedings stopped there. Pol Pot. Guards rushed toward a wooden hut in the jungle compound. A radio crackles with hurried voices. Inside the dim room, the man on the bed is no longer moving. The camp grows quiet. On the 15th of April 1998, Pol Pot died in a Khmer Rouge stronghold at Am Long Veng in northern Cambodia. He was 72 years old. For nearly 4 years he led Democratic Kampuchea as its secretive revolutionary leader. His regime emptied cities, abolished currency, and forced millions into rural labor camps. Records show the policies caused mass starvation, executions, and the deaths of roughly 2 million people. The revolution collapsed long before his death. Vietnamese forces overthrew the Khmer Rouge government in 1979. Pol Pot retreated with loyal fighters into jungle bases along the Thai border. Witnesses later recalled that internal division slowly weakened the remaining movement. Then betrayal arrived. In 1997, Khmer Rouge commander Tamak turned against Pol Pot after factional disputes. Authorities determined Pol Pot was captured by his own organization and placed under house arrest. Within the An Long Veng camp, the former leader now waited under guard. Records show the Khmer Rouge conducted a public internal trial, accusing him of crimes against the movement. International pressure grew as the Cambodian government demanded his transfer for prosecution. The deadline approached. Accounts vary about exactly what happened during his final hours. Some witnesses later claimed Pol Pot suffered heart failure. Others suspected suicide after learning he might be handed over to an international tribunal. What is documented is this. On the night of the 15th of April, guards discovered him lying motionless on a bed inside the hut. A small generator hummed nearby. A lantern still burned on the table. Several fighters stood silently in the doorway. He did not respond. He was 72 years old. Authorities later confirmed Pol Pot had died before any transfer to court could occur. Khmer Rouge members quickly arranged a cremation using tires and scrap wood at the jungle camp. The fire burned overnight. Photographs taken by journalists soon circulated worldwide showing the improvised funeral site. Governments and investigators demanded confirmation of the dictator's death. One former fighter reportedly stared without speaking. Pol Pot once ordered mass executions across Cambodia. Now his body was burned quietly in a jungle clearing. The tribunal never tried him. The camp returned to silence. The ashes remain there. Fidel Castro. The hospital corridor stays sealed under military guard. Doctors move in and out of a private room, while aides carry written updates down the hallway. Outside the compound, security vehicles idle through the night. Inside, the old leader no longer speaks. On the 25th of November 2016, Fidel Castro died in Havana, Cuba. He was 90 years old. For nearly half a century, he ruled Cuba after the 1959 revolution that overthrew Fulgencio Batista. His government centralized power, nationalized industries, and aligned closely with the Soviet Union. Records show Castro survived numerous assassination plots and political crises during the Cold War. His authority defined the island. In 2006, Castro suffered severe intestinal illness that forced him to step aside from daily leadership. Witnesses later recalled that public appearances stopped while his younger brother, Raul Castro, assumed government duties. Power shifted quietly. Authorities determined the Cuban state maintained tight control over information about his health. Official broadcasts mention recovery periods, but rarely describe specific medical details. Recognition came gradually. By the mid-2010s, Fidel Castro no longer held formal office, though he occasionally appeared in state photographs. Records show Raul Castro continued governing the country while preparing a long-term political transition. Then the final moment arrived. In the late evening inside a guarded Havana residence, doctors checked vital signs. Monitors tracked the final readings beside the bed. Curtains remained closed against the city lights. Several aides stood silently nearby. The breathing stopped. He was 90 years old. Official reports confirmed Fidel Castro died on the 25th of November 2016 in Havana. Authorities immediately began state funeral procedures directed by the Cuban government. Raul Castro announced the death on national television. The body was cremated shortly afterward, according to official instructions from Castro himself. Authorities placed the ashes inside a small cedar urn guarded by military officers. The procession began days later. Records show the urn traveled across the island along the reverse route of Castro's 1959 Revolutionary March. Crowds gathered along highways and public squares as the convoy moved toward Santiago de Cuba. One elderly supporter reportedly wiped tears silently. Castro once commanded revolutionary tribunals and state security courts. Now his remains traveled quietly inside a small urn. The ashes were buried in Santiago. The ceremony ended beside a granite monument. The era closed there.